Okay, so happy Purim. So I just have to give context for anybody who's watching the recording. What is this bizarre thing have to do with the book of Samuel?
You shouldn't have said anything.
Right. So today is Purim, and that's why I'm wearing a wig. So just to get into the mood with the serious nature of the book of Samuel. So we're on chapter. I'm just going to mute all. And of course, you know how to unmute if you have a question or comment. We're on page 16 in the edition of Samuel, starting chapter 3. But I believe, did we finish? Oh, no, still have to. Barry's coming in. We still have to finish the commentary from ancient Israel on the last few verses from chapter 2 before we start chapter 3. That's why I thought we had something left to do. Okay, so happy Purim, everybody. And so, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So, just to remind us of the end of chapter 2, before and Marlene is coming in too. Okay, just to remind us of the end of chapter 2, because we're going to look at the below the line in ancient Israel on chapter 2. Let's just read the English translation, and there I'm on page 14 in this book. And there came a man of God unto Eli and said unto him, Thus says the Lord, did I reveal myself unto the house of your father when they were in Egypt in bondage to Pharaoh's house? And did I choose him out of all the tribes of Israel to be my priest, to go up unto my altar and burn incense, to wear an ephod before me? And did I give unto the house of your father in all the offerings of the children of Israel made by fire? Wherefore kick you at my sacrifice and at my offering, which I have commanded in my habitation, and honor you your sons above me, to make yourselves fat with the chiefest of all the offerings of Israel, my people. Remember, that's what his sons were doing. They were eating all the sacrifice or demanding more animals from people than what was allotted to the Kohanim. Okay, so they're taking advantage. So this unknown man of God is coming to Eli to tell him about his doom. Therefore, verse 30 on page 14, we're just catching up with the end of chapter 2 because we hadn't read yet the commentary in ancient Israel. Therefore, the Lord, the God of Israel, says, I said indeed that your house and the house of your father should walk before me forever. But now the Lord says, Be it far from me, for them that honor me I will honor, and they that despise me shall be lightly esteemed. Behold, the days come that I will cut off your arm and the arm of your father's house, that there shall not be an old man in your house. And you shall behold a rival in my habitation, in all the good which shall be done to Israel. And there shall not be an old man in your house forever. Yet will I not cut off every man of yours from your altar, and make your eyes to fail and your heart to languish, and all the increase of your house shall die young men. And this shall be the sign unto you, that which shall come upon your two sons, on Hophni and Pinchas. In one day they shall die both of them. And I will raise me up a faithful priest, that shall do according to that which is in my heart and in my mind. And I will build him a sure house, and he shall walk before my anointed forever. And it shall come to pass that everyone that is left in your house shall come and bow down to him for a piece of silver and a loaf of bread, and shall say, Put me, I pray you, into one of the priest's offices, that I may eat a morsel of bread. Okay, so this is the doom of the line of Kohen Gadol that was supposed to go through Eli, that now is going to go through somebody else. And I think this serves as to compare it to Saul being picked to be the king, and then the dynasty begins and ends with Saul because of Saul's sin, and then starting with a different dynasty. So literarily, was it necessary to put it? Did this really happen, or is this a matter of literature to just as the kingship shifted from Saul to David, so too the high priesthood shifts from Eli to somebody else. So let's see what Alter says. So we're on page 251 in the Ancient Israel, beginning with verse 27. A man of God came to Eli. This enunciation of a curse on the house of Eli at the very beginning of the Samuel story is introduced at precisely the corresponding place in the narrative as the denunciation and admonition of the divine messenger at the beginning of Judges chapter 2. An analogous curse will be pronounced by Nathan the prophet on the house of David in 2 Samuel 12 and will be enacted in the subsequent narrative. Okay, so there are what Alter is saying, that this idea of a denunciation will be seen, has been seen already in Judges, and will be seen again in 2 Samuel. Slaves to Pharaoh's house. The Masoretic text lacks slaves to, but it is attested in the Qumran Samuel scroll, in the Septuagint, and in the Targum of Yonatan ben Uziel. So older traditions of the book of Samuel and other books of the Bible that are found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, in the Greek translation, and in the Aramaic translation of Yonatan ben Uziel reflect a different tradition. So it just highlights, where the Masoretic. So the Masoretic text is a text of the Bible that we have in front of us. When you buy a Jewish Bible, that's the Masoretic text that was approved by the so-called Masoretes in like the 800s in Tiberias in Israel. Okay? And they decided, despite the fact that they had the tradition of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Septuagint, and the Targum, the Aramaic translation, they decided to go with what we have, rather than what other ideas were out there. 29, my sacrifice and my offering which I have commanded. The Masoretic text reads, which I commanded, as a habitation. Since that makes no sense and all attempts to rescue a meaning seem forced, I have assumed that ma'on is an excrescence, perhaps inadvertently transposed by a scribe from verse 32, where it also occurs rather enigmatically. Several points in the curse pronounced by the man of God look textually defective. Like there are problems in the text, and Alter is, so an excrescence means, it's an extra word, like it was mistakenly written. Like if you're transcribing by hand, and your eye might skip from one line to another because the word looks the same. And you might put that word in a place where it really wasn't supposed to be. So that's what he's saying, that this word ma'on is in the Hebrew. Okay. 30, will walk before me. The biblical idiom suggests dedicated service of a deity. Honor and dishonored, the Hebrew terms mean etymologically heavy and light, that is, weighty and worthless. These antonyms will recur at strategic moments in the Ark narrative and in the story of David. Look with a jaundiced eye. So let me just see that. 32. Tsar ma'on. Vehibadatat tsar. That's interesting. The English here, our English says, and you shall behold a rival in your habitation. So he translates, you shall look with a jaundiced eye at all the bounty bestowed upon Israel. So look with a jaundiced eye. The received text at this point is very doubtful, yielding literally a nonsense chain. You will look narrow habitation. This translation adopts an emendation that has considerable scholarly currency. Ayin instead of ma'on, a difference of one consonant in the Hebrew. Okay, that yields the idiom tsa'ar ayin, jealously or with a jaundiced eye. But the Qumran text and one version of the Septuagint lack the entire clause. No man of you will I cut off. The usual understanding of these words is that God will leave them alive to witness in pain the destruction of the family. This interpretation seems a bit strained because in the next verse, God promises to destroy both of Eli's sons on a single day. Perhaps the clause originally read, every man of you will I cut off, though this phrasing is not reflected in any of the ancient versions. Fall by the sword of men. Again, both the Qumran fragment and version B of the Septuagint confirm this reading, which seems much likelier than the Masoretic text cryptic, shall die as men. And then on 253, a stalwart priest, a stalwart house. The Hebrew ne'eman in the first instance means faithful or trustworthy. In the second instance, well-founded, enduring. The present translation draws on an older sense of stalwart, which can be applied to structures and inanimate objects as well as to people. The probable referent of the prophecy is the house of Tzadok, which was to become the priestly line in the Davidic monarchy. Before my anointed, like Hannah's psalm, this whole passage of prophecy appears to presuppose a historical context in which the monarchy was an established fact.
Rabbi, question.
Yes, Dov.
My understanding was that when the Septuagint, when it was translated, everybody had the same translation.
Yeah, that's the midrash that goes with it. We have no idea, really. I mean, the likelihood that 70, because it's the word Septuagint is from the 70 who were the ones to translate the Bible into Greek. And I think the legend is that the Pharaoh forced the translation and said, you all die. Well, each of you have to be in a different room, and you have to come up with the exact same translation. If there's any difference, you die. And somehow, miraculously, all 70 had the exact same, came up with this exact same Greek text. So, but I don't know. I guess you can Google Septuagint. And if you trust Wikipedia, you can, or maybe Encyclopedia Britannica is online, or Encyclopedia Judaica is online. You can come up with a decent scholarly article about understanding who wrote and when it was, who wrote the Septuagint and when it was written.
Okay.
I don't know. I just don't know enough about it. I only know that it's from the time of the Second Temple. It's before the destruction of the Second Temple by the Romans. But I don't, and I think it was written in Alexandria and Egypt, but that's about as much as I know about it.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so I do know from taking Bible classes in rabbinical school by Bible professors that there are, so you have the Septuagint, you have Dead Sea Scrolls, you have also the Samaritan Bible, which is known as the Peshitta, which are ancient manuscripts that can be used and can be helpful in understanding verses that might be otherwise hard to understand. So that's why Alter is referring to them here, because the Hebrew just doesn't make full sense. And if you have another edition in front of you, that can be helpful. But the tradition is we go with a Masoretic text. But then if you're a Bible scholar, you have the opportunity to look at other editions to kind of get a sense of what the text might be trying to say. So it's not a big deal in books of the Bible that aren't the Torah. It is a big deal in the Torah if you dare to use a different edition and then come up with a different halacha from the different edition of the Torah that you have. Okay, so you can't, I guess, traditional Jews who care about halacha will not apply the scholarly study of other editions to the Torah that they might otherwise do for the rest of the Bible. Because for the rest of the Bible, for all intents and purposes, it doesn't matter. Because there's no halacha coming from this. Okay, so that it doesn't The only thing that would matter for some traditionalists is the book of Esther, which we just read today and last night. So anybody who dares to say that the book of Esther isn't real, you can't really get away with that in traditional Jewish circles. But in scholarly circles, when halacha isn't a factor, and also Jewish tradition isn't a factor, you can say whatever you want. Okay, chapter 3. So now we're going to focus on Samuel and his growing up in the house of Eli. So chapter 2 just ends with this forewarning, this doom of Eli, and it's not happening yet, but it'll when it happens. We're supposed to remember what happened what was foretold at the end of chapter 2. V'hana'ar Shmuel misharet et Adonai lifnei Eli, u'devar Adonai haya yakar bayamim hahem, ein chazon nifratz. So this is a fascinating sentence. So the lad, the child, the young boy, it's unclear how old he was at this point, because Na'ar could mean little boy. It could also mean teenager. So we don't know how old he is at this point. Our translation says child. Alter says lad. All right, so we'll see in the commentary maybe if they suggest how old he was here. He was serving God before Eli. And the word of God, and this is the parenthetical note, the word of God was rare. Now, yakar is valuable, it's expensive, it's dear. But I think it also, in this, here also says precious, but I think it means unique. Alter says rare. And so the word of God was rare or unique or unusual in those days. There wasn't frequent vision, that is chazon. So the word chazon is vision, but it means a prophetic vision. I believe chapter 6 of Isaiah starts Chazon Yeshayahu ben Amoz. This is the vision of Isaiah, son of Amoz. So Chazon, Chazon in a biblical context means a prophetic vision. Okay? So prophetic visions were not common in those days.
You're talking about Eli having a prophetic vision. Who else would have them?
Anybody, any prophet. So we haven't heard about prophets in Joshua and in Judges. Like there was an angel that appeared to Joshua before the battle with Jericho. Every now and then, God speaks to somebody in Joshua and Judges. But it's rare, and there wasn't really a prophet. Who is this Ish Ha-Elohim here at the end of chapter 2? He's not a Navi, not a prophet. And he's also unnamed. So we don't know who he is. We have judges who are like Samson, who have the power of God in them, but they're not really like, in other words, we are familiar because we go to shul and we hear a haftarah on Shabbat, and most of the haftarahs on Shabbat are from the books of the prophets in the Bible. And so that's what we're used to, prophecy like that. So Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, the three big ones, and then the 12 minor ones. So there were prophets from the time of King David until the exile in Babylonia. And also there are three more, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, who are prophets when they come back to the land of Israel. So right before the building of the Second Temple, we have prophets in our tradition, at least according to the Bible, from King David. Yes, because Samuel is considered the first of those prophets, all the way to Malachi, the end, or Zechariah, the end of that prophetic era. And then we don't have prophets anymore. And we actually don't have any books of the Bible that are in the Bible that take place after the building of the Second Temple. There are other books like Ben Sira, which is a really important book, and verses from Ben Sira appear in our Siddur. But Ben Sira, which is written close to the time of the rabbis, was not included by the rabbis in the Bible. So I'm not a Ben Sira scholar, so I can't tell you why. Why the rabbis would allow verses from Ben Sira to be included in the Siddur, meaning they accept what Ben Sira has to say about theology, but they don't accept his book to be in the Bible. I don't know. So I'm not a canon scholar to talk about that. Yes, Barry.
You said it's an important book. Why?
Because of the verses from it that are in the Siddur.
Okay.
Okay,
Just
so,
because it's been okay.
and even in my rabbi's manual, right? So it's like a handbook for rabbis to, here are prayers to recite at a funeral. Here are prayers and psalms that you can recite at a wedding. So in my rabbi's manual, there's a selection from Ben Sira that could be recited at a funeral. So, it's a book that has been maintained over tradition because there are sections of it that coincide with rabbinic thought.
So is it a book this class should read, perhaps, since we'll get it no place else in total as a whole?
Yeah. So
Maybe-
I'm hesitating only because
When we get there, Bess.
yeah, when we get there. So let's get to the end of the Bible first, because it's a post-biblical book, chronologically, historically. But to find it, there is no edition. This doesn't have an edition. I'm just saying that because it's not in the Jewish Bible, Jewish editions of the Bible don't have it. So it's kind of hard to find. I think Sefaria, you can probably find it on Sefaria, and I don't know if there's a cheap edition of it, because it's also known in English as Ecclesiasticus, not Ecclesiastes, but Ecclesiasticus is Ben Sira. Anyway, we digress greatly, just because of the first verse here, where it says that visions from God were not common in that time. So it's just giving us a preamble for a vision that's about to happen. 2. Vayehi bayom hahu, ve'eli shochev bimakomo, ve'enav hechelu chehot, ve'lo yuchal lirot. And it was on that day. So literally, this means on that day. Which day? We're not told about a day. We're told about a time that Samuel was serving God in front of Eli. So I'm just saying Bayom Hahu is an unusual reference to mean at that time. It could have just said Vayehi, or it could mean Vayehi bayamim hahem, in those days. But to use the singular on that day is just unusual, because we don't know what day it was. So Eli was lying in his place, and his eyes had become dim, probably means he has cataracts, and he's not able to see. Verse 3, V'ner Elohim terem yichbeh, u'shmuel shochev behechal Adonai, asher sham Aron Elohim. And the candle of God, or the light of God had not gone out yet. So we're talking about late night, early morning. So we're supposed to remember that at the time, at the commandment for the building of the Mishkan, back in the book of Exodus, where we're in the midst of reading right now, we're told that candles had to be lit every night, and they would stay lit overnight until dawn. So we're being reminded here. So this was the time of night. It was the candle was still lit. This fire of God was still lit in the Mishkan before it went out. So we're talking like 4 a.m, and Shmuel was lying in the sanctuary of God. Now, is he allowed to lie there? That's bizarre. And he was lying there in the sanctuary of God where the ark of God was. So why is it that he's allowed to lie there? I don't have an answer, but go ahead, Ron, unmute.
It's similar to Joshua, who is also called Nar and Misharet.
Okay, good.
He stays in the tent of meeting, which we'll read tomorrow.
Right, very good. But so it's one thing to say he's in the tent of meeting somewhere, but here he's in the Hechal Adonai. That's the special place. And as far as we know, Shmuel is not a Kohen. So only a Kohen's allowed to be there, and only allowed to be there when offering a sacrifice. Are you allowed to sleep there? Things happen when we sleep, and I'll just leave it at that. And so therefore, it's not holy. It's a holy place. And when you're sleeping, you do unholy things that are out of your control. So whether it's a nightmare or anything else, anything can happen. It's just bizarre that Samuel's allowed to sleep there, right in front of the Ark of God. Okay, so.
Could he not have fallen asleep praying?
No.
Late at night?
I don't think so, because the text doesn't tell us that. Okay, so it's just no. I'm just saying it's appropriate to ask ourselves, what the heck is Samuel doing, sleeping? It's, in other words, like if we had a Shabbaton here, like a USY convention, and we offered the sanctuary as a place for people to sleep, and people put their sleeping bags in front of the ark. You just wouldn't do that. You just don't do that. So it's just not an appropriate place to sleep. And so so our ark with the Torahs in it is less holy than the ark that was in the temple, and less holy than the ark that was in the Mishkan. Because that was understood, those arks were understood to be, the Shekhinah was there. And the tablets of the Ten Commandments were there. So that was really, really holy. And the Kohen Gadol only entered the ark on Yom Kippur. So it's a holy place. What is Samuel doing sleeping there? But, verse 4, maybe he was sleeping there because somehow he knew what was going to happen in verse 4. Vayikra Adonai el Shmuel, vayomer hineni. And God called to Samuel, and he said, here I am. So, and verse 5. Vayaratz el Eli, vayomer hineni ki karatali, vayomer lo karati shuv shechav, vayelech vayishkav. So this is fascinating. Verse 4, God calls to Samuel, and Samuel says, Hineni. So we assume that Samuel knows it's God talking to him. But no, verse 5 says, he ran, Samuel, so he hears the voice of God, he says, Hineni, and he hears a voice, and he says, Hineni, and he runs to Eli, and he says, here, you've called to me. And Eli says, no, I didn't call you. Go back to sleep. And he went back to sleep. Or he lay back down to go to sleep. All right, so the reader knows it's the voice of God. Samuel hears a voice, and he assumes it's Eli talking. Now, that's also interesting. How is it that God sounds like Eli? he's serving Eli, so he knows what Eli sounds like. So he hears this voice in the middle of the night. He thinks it's Eli. So is God hiding God's voice, or like impersonating Eli to talk to Shmuel? Or is it a dream that Samuel has? That in the dream, God's voice sounds like Eli? So, okay, let's go on. 6, Vayosef Adonai kro od Shmuel, Vayakom Shmuel, Vayelech el Eli, Vayomer Hinani ki karata li, Vayomer lo karati vini, shuv shechav. So God called again to Samuel, and Samuel, so it could be God called again, quote, Samuel, end quote. So in other words, Samuel, or however we could imagine God talking. And Samuel got up and went to Eli and said, here I am, you called me. And Eli said, no, I didn't call you, my son. Go back to sleep. 7, Ushmuel terem yada et Adonai, v'terem yigale elav devar Adonai. And this is the Samuel who did not know God yet, and the word of God had not been revealed to him yet. So we shouldn't be upset with Samuel, the narrator is telling us why he didn't understand that it was God's voice and thought it was Eli's voice, because it's Samuel who hadn't understood it yet. 8, Vayosef Adonai kro Shmuel, Bashlishit, Vayakom Vayelech el Eli, Vayomer Hinani ki karantali, Vayaven Eli ki Adonai kore lanar. So God called Samuel again a third time, and he got up and went to Eli and said, here I am, you called to me. And then Eli understood that God was calling the Na'ar, the boy, the lad. So it's, yeah, go ahead.
Is there a difference, significance to Hineni versus Hineni in the Hebrew? Is that, or are
Yes.
they synonyms?
They are synonyms. It's just grammatically where it appears in the grammatic phrase. So, Vayomer Hineni, why isn't it Vayomer Hineni? Vayomer. So, Al, all I can say, it's for grammatical reasons. It's the exact same word. The emphasis is a little bit different for grammatical sake, but I don't know. I can't explain to you what the grammar is. I'm sorry. Yeah. But it's good to point it out and to be aware of it, but it's just for grammatical purposes, the thrust of the meaning is the exact same. Okay, so the other interesting thing here is that it took Eli 3 times for him to understand that God's calling Samuel. So the first time you can understand, okay, Eli's getting up, he's old too, his eyes are dim. That could also be a metaphor that his mind is dim too. So it might take him a while to wake up, right? Like you get a phone call in the middle of the night, and it takes you a while to figure out what's going on and to sound coherent on the phone, that kind of thing. So the first time you can understand that. So how long it took until God called again? Like had he gone back to sleep, or is he still awake thinking about it? So second time, maybe he should have thought the second time something's going on here with Samuel. Why it took Eli 3 times? So I don't know, but it's just interesting too to think about that. Okay, so Eli understood that God's calling to Samuel. Samuel doesn't know it yet. Samuel just thinks Eli is calling, and maybe Eli is acting like Alzheimer's or dementia. So he's just acting like a really old man, and so he's just being kind to him. 9. Vayomer Eli li Shmuel, lech shechav, v'haya im yikra elecha, ve'amarta, daber Adonai, ki shomea avdecha, vayelech Shmuel, vayishkav b'mekomo. So Eli says to Shmuel, go back to sleep. And if God calls to you, again, this is what you're supposed to say. This is what you're supposed to say to God. Like Eli knew what to say just in case God were to speak to him. And maybe people knew what to say if God spoke to you. Somehow you're supposed to have it like in your back pocket, just in case if God speaks to you. Remember, this is what you're supposed to say. I don't know. It's like telling a kid, like if you get lost, remember your address. Just don't forget. So memorize your address. I want to hear it. I want to hear you say it. So I know you know your address so that if you get lost, you'll be able to tell the policeman or the policewoman what your address is. So like if God calls to you, this is what you're supposed to say. You're supposed to say, speak, God, because your servant is listening. I guess I would, you might have to add a word or two to make it a little bit more formal. Please, God, speak, for your servant is listening. And Shmuel went, and he lay down in his place. 10. Vayavo Adonai, vayitzav, vayikra kefa'am befa'am, Shmuel, Shmuel. Vayomer Shmuel, daber ki shomea avdecha. Now, fascinating here. You got to pay attention to the words. So God came and stood. God wasn't coming and standing before. God was speaking before, right? It's verse 4 is vayikra, and 6 karo od Shmuel, and 8 karo Shmuel. God is calling out. Now here, God is standing. God is coming and standing, and then he's calling out like the other times, kefa'am befa'am, like the other times, and he says Shmuel, Shmuel. No, the other times he said Shmuel. This time, he's saying the fourth time that he's calling to him, he is standing and saying Shmuel, Shmuel. And Shmuel says, now Eli just told him, daber Adonai ki shomea avdecha. He says, what does Shmuel say? Daber ki shomea avdecha. He leaves out God's name. Speak, because your servant hears you. So, okay, so he reflects the idea that Shmuel's a servant, but he doesn't say, speak, O God. So why does he leave out Adonai? It would be interesting if the Qumran or the other scrolls add the word Adonai after daber here. So,
Jonah,
yes.
does the Bible ever say "Bavakasha," please?
Yes, but it mostly says na, like daber na Adonai would be a more appropriate than just a regular speak God. It should be please speak God. Okay, let's stop here and look at the commentary on these first 10 verses.
Also, Jonah,
Yes.
when God spoke to Moses, didn't he repeat Moses' name also? Moses.
Yes. So but right there. Usually, that's the time that yes, God does repeat the person's name that God speaks to. Sometimes, but not always. But again, here in verse 10, he's repeating Samuel's name. But the first 3 times he's calling to him, God is calling to him. He only says Samuel's name once. So why the 4th time does he say Samuel, Samuel? And also, why does Samuel, he just memorized daber Adonai ki shomea avdecha. That 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 words. That's all he has to memorize. Daber Adonai ki shomea avdecha. He leaves out one of the words that he memorized, and which is an important word. It's God's name. So it's just interesting to me, while reading it. Is it significant? I don't know. I think Shmuel is a man of God. Why he would leave it out? Maybe he's just flustered and just forgets. I don't know. Dov.
Yeah, it appears to me that perhaps part of the mission here in White, he says it twice or three times singularly, but to get Eli's attention so that Eli knows that Shmuel is having this vision.
Maybe. I don't know. Maybe Shmuel, because he's too young, doesn't think he's worthy enough to hear God, and so he has to like consult with his boss, Eli, to say, "Is it okay that I'm hearing this?" Like he's giving Eli a chance to tell him. So it takes a while for him to get yes. So it's possible that Shmuel understands it's God's voice right from the beginning, but we don't know because the text is vague. We don't know if Shmuel really understands that or not. Marlene.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I don't know if this really is connected, but sometimes, I mean, maybe it's a literary device. Three times, like it reminds us of the, the three fathers, Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov.
Yes,
So maybe
yes.
it's just a number thing.
It's possible. It's possible. It could be a literary thing. And that, yes, whoever's writing this about Samuel's first encounter with God makes it in a way, like writes it in a way that the reader at the time would understand that it's using a literary device like three. Oh yes, so that makes sense to a person hearing it. Of course, God's going to speak three times before the fourth time, like that. So yeah, it could simply be that. We don't know. We don't know if it really happened this way. We don't know if Samuel ever existed as a prophet anyway. Whatever. But so yes. What is the significance of the literary device also? Okay, so let's look at the commentary beginning on the bottom of 16, the call of Samuel. There is an appealing simplicity about the narrative of Samuel's first intimation of his special relationship with God, which makes it one of the most delightful stories in the Bible. Delightful. So I don't know if I would call a calling of God to prophecy delightful. I would call it awe-inspiring. Not sure I would call it delightful. So if you can compare the calls to prophecy, I'm sure scholars have done that over the centuries. Like Moses, well, like Abraham's call to prophecy. Abraham's call to prophecy is just get up and go. There's no introduction to God at all. For Moses, Moses' call to prophecy was a burning bush. So you get that. So, and all the prophets are different too, about how they get called by God. So everyone is a slightly different story, from which then I think the Bible's trying to teach us that there isn't one way that God's going to call someone to prophecy. There could be any possibility of seeing God and hearing God's voice. Now, the only challenge is that, if anybody claims today that God has spoken to them, we think they're crazy, because there hasn't been a prophet in Jewish tradition for 2,500 years, like assuming Malachi or Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi were living around the time that the Second Temple was being built. So just very roughly, that's about 500 BCE. So if that's the last time there was a prophet in the Jewish tradition, 2,500 years, and now if somebody claims that they're a prophet, especially if they're wearing a crazy wig like I'm wearing now, you're going to think the person's insane and you're going to commit them. So I'm not saying that that's not the appropriate thing to do. I'm just saying that it's tragic, spiritually tragic, that we haven't been encouraged to try to hear God's voice speaking to us. Okay, there might be people who have done good things in the world, who we might say God has spoken to them, and they're acting in the name of God. I'm not sure that they would. Martin Luther King spoke prophetically, like I've been to the mountaintop and I've seen. So, but he's quoting somebody else. Not sure that you would argue that Martin Luther King claimed himself to be a prophet. Certainly he claimed that he had like this important mission, and he kind of knew that he was going to die in the process. But was he a prophet? I guess if you believe and you're a strong disciple and follower of Martin Luther King, so it'd be the same, I think, of anybody who does good things in the world, that perhaps they were a prophet and they were hearing the word of God. But again, if anybody were to claim that they were talking in God's name, like terrorists do, and some unfortunate people might claim that too. So, okay. So the commentary goes on. The child Samuel. Josephus preserves a Jewish tradition to the effect that Samuel had just completed his 12th year when the word of God came to him. That is, that he had reached his religious majority. So he completed his 12th year. That means he became bar mitzvah. So he became 13. Okay, so that Josephus, when he wrote his history, the history was based on traditions that were passed down from the Midrash that he knew as a good Jewish boy. He learned these traditions and wrote it down as if it were actual history. So the tradition was that Samuel was bar mitzvah, like this was his bar mitzvah day. Precious, in the sense of rare. The statement is intended to account for the fact that Samuel was unaware of the meaning of his experience when God called to him, right? So he hadn't heard, like it wasn't a common thing, so that he would know right away, oh, wow, I'm having this experience too. At that time, literally on that day, either the day when the prophet appeared to Eli, or the memorable day which left such a deep mark upon Samuel's life. Like I'm just pointing out, they're trying to explain why it says on that day. Because which day was it? It should say at that time. It should be a phrase for at that time. Okay, so that's why the commentators are trying to figure out which day it was. Okay, the bottom is 17, lamp gone out. If this refers to the candelabrum, the time of the revelation would have been just before dawn, right? So the same idea, the light that was lit before, at the last thing to do, so that the light stays lit all night in the Mishkan. So that's why. To sleep in the temple, Ralbag suggests that the word temple, like in the Heichal, in the sanctuary, should be understood as including the buildings around the tabernacle, in one of which Eli and Samuel were sleeping. Okay. That's because the commentaries are just as surprised by this as I am. What is Samuel doing sleeping in this holy place? It shouldn't be done. So they have to work around it and say, oh, no. Don't understand that he was actually in the sanctuary itself, but he's in the buildings that are around the sanctuary. Okay, well, the text should have said that. But that's what the commentary here is saying, because we can't understand that Samuel will be sleeping right there. Kimchi, however, takes the sense to be, and the lamp of God was not yet gone out in the temple of the Lord. Okay, so that means you have to replace, you'd have to like do cut and paste with the Hebrew here. So, V'ner Elohim terem yichbeh skip u'shmuel shochev behechal Adonai. Asher sham Aron Elohim, and then Ushmuel Shochev. So if you move Ushmuel Shochev, then the candle of God hadn't gone out yet in the sanctuary of God where the ark was. And then to say Samuel was sleeping, Vayikra Adonai El Shmuel. Okay, so that's how Kimchi is understanding it better. Okay, modern scholars accept the literal interpretation of the verse that Samuel slept as an attendant near the ark. 7, did not yet know, in the sense of that immediate knowledge of God which is received in revelation. He therefore failed to recognize the voice, and perhaps, since prophecy was so rare in those days, had not yet learned of the phenomena of divine communication with men as a continuing possibility. Okay, so the commentary here doesn't suggest Dov, like you did, that maybe he understood, but he had to go to Eli first, just to check. So the commentary is suggesting, no, because it was rare, he just didn't know that it was the voice of God. And then verse 10, commentary on 18, and stood, the voice became a vision. Speak, for your servant hears. Note that Samuel does not repeat exactly the words which Eli had mentioned to him, enjoined him to say. He omits mention of God's name, not yet certain that God could have revealed himself to him. So that's also condoning Samuel leaving out God's name, that he's still not exactly clear that it is God, even though he's having the vision now of God standing in front of him. Okay, so that's through verse 10. Let's read altar on this, and then we'll end here for today. Just want to make sure, I hear the door ringing, and just want to make sure Jerry's in the office to answer the door. I'll be right back.
See him not answering the door with the wig. Yes. Actually, I prefer thinking of him answering the door with the wig.
If you're interested, the book of Ben Sira is on Sepharia.
Yeah, I figured it was. I didn't even bother.
Well, you never know. These apocryphal books.
Well-
You can buy it as part of a 2-volume set. Each one is about that thick and contains about 50.
Well, let's try and remember when we finish the whole thing, all the Bible that we're going through, let's remember to remind Jonah that he said he would do Ben Sira.
I don't think he committed.
I don't think we'll remember.
Yeah, because I have the book, the Apocrypha.
right.
There.
I'm sorry about that.
Five Street,
Amazon.
and
Amazon
I don't know if
delivery.
it's in there.
Okay, so let's just read altar on the beginning of chapter 3, page 254 and 255. The word of the Lord was rare, vision was not spread about. The word of the Lord is often a technical term referring to oracular message. Inquiring of the oracle would have been a priestly function, and so there's intimation here of some sort of breakdown in the professional performance of the house of Eli. But the same phrase also is used to announce prophecy, and vision is a prophetic term. The whole episode concerns the transition from priestly to prophetic authority. So again, we don't know about the priest. The transition that's happening here is from judges to prophet, because in Joshua and Judges we don't really have a mention of the Kohanim doing sacrifices, or that people were going to the Mishkan to do sacrifices. So not sure why altar would say transition from priestly to prophetic. I mean, that's literally what's happening. Eli was just told that the line of priesthood is ending with him. But it's just unusual that we had the focus on Eli at all, because in Joshua and Judges, we don't have a focus on priests. So I just think it's a transition from judges to prophet. 2, he could not see. Eli's blindness not only reflects his decrepitude, but his incapacity for vision in the sense of the previous verse. He is immersed in permanent darkness, while the lad Samuel has God's lamp burning by his bedside. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, since the sanctuary lamp would have burned through most of the night. This may be an indication, as Kyle McCarter Jr. has proposed, that the scene occurs close to dawn, but the symbolic overtones of the image should not be neglected. Though vision has become rare, God's lamp has not yet gone out, and the young ministrant will be the one to make it burn bright again. The actual lamp would have been a concave earthenware vessel filled with oil. So, Alter is right about understanding this in the bigger literary metaphorical sense too. He ran to Eli and he said, "Here I am." These words make clear that the previous "here I am" is not a direct response to God, but rather the boys calling out from the inner chamber of the sanctuary to Eli in the outer room, thinking that it is Eli who called him. Samuel's thrice repeated error in this regard reflects not only his youthful inexperience, but as a 6th century Hebrew exegete Yosef Karo has proposed, the general fact that the word of the Lord was rare, revelation, and unfamiliar phenomena. Samuel In an intensifying pattern, as the folktale structure of 3 repetitions with a final reversal unfolds, God's address is now represented more immediately in dialogue instead of indirectly, as in verse 4. The 3rd time, God will say, Samuel, Samuel. I did not call my son. Until this point, we have been told nothing about Eli's relationship to Samuel. The introduction of this single term of affection, my son, reveals the fondness of the blind and doomed Eli for his young assistant. His own biological sons have, of course, utterly betrayed his trust. Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. This is virtually a formula of deferential response to superior authority. When Samuel repeats these words in verse 10, he omits Lord, perhaps as Shimon bar Ephraim has suggested, in diffidence about addressing God. Okay, so a couple of comments trying to figure out why he left Adonai out of from that formula. Okay, so we'll stop here for today. Thank you for being flexible in your time to be able to start at 10 o'clock today. Enjoy the rest of your Purim holiday, and Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Chag Purim,
Chag
Shabbat Shalom.
Yeah, Chag Sameach.
Chag
Shalom.
Shabbat
Thank you,
shalom.
Jonah.